Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Rivera. Today we're going to read another story by Andrea Beatty. Some of us have already read Rosie Revere, Engineer, this one right here, and Iggy Peck, Architect. And if you've read these books already, you probably know that have a lot to do with building and kind of introduces us to some STEM activities also that you could do at home. But today we are going to read from the same author, Ada Twist, Scientist. And before we start, I do want to go over the activity first so that you know what you're going to have to do before we read the book. So let me go through that. So the first thing you're going to do is watch my video and listen to the story and then answer the questions. But first, before you answer the questions, you need to know what a hypothesis is. You've probably heard that word in science before. So I put a definition here just to help you if you did not remember what a hypothesis was. A hypothesis is just a fancy word for an educated guess. So it's a guess that you make based on information you already know. So, for example, if I'm looking outside and I see it's getting dark and the clouds are getting gray, I know based on what I already know about rain that it looks like it's going to rain. Okay? I'm not just taking any guess, I'm taking a guess based on what I already know. And after you make a hypothesis, then it says it comes the really fun part. You can do a science experiment to see what happens. So a lot of times if you want to figure out how something works or what's going to happen, you might want to make a little science experiment to figure it out. And before you do your experiment, you would make a hypothesis. You would make an educated guess on what will happen. Now, when you do these hypotheses, it doesn't mean that they're always going to be correct. Sometimes we don't make a correct hypothesis. So after the science experiment is over and you finished, that's when you decide if your hypothesis was correct or incorrect. And it's okay to be incorrect because many famous scientists have been incorrect, and that's how they figure out what to fix in their experiment to make it work. Okay, so anyway, here are the questions for the story. So now that we know what a hypothesis is, Ada is going to make a hypothesis. And her first hypothesis is about a terrible stink, like a smell. And we need to know what her first hypothesis is, what her first guess about it is. And what tools does she use to test her hypothesis? So we'll figure that out as we read. Number two asks if her hypothesis was correct or not. And don't just say yes or no. I want you to explain it. Why was it correct or why wasn't it correct? Then she's going to make a second hypothesis or guess in the story. And you have to discuss it. Tell how she tested it, what her hypothesis was, and the outcome. What happened? Did her second hypothesis make a change or do anything? Did it do anything differently than the first hypothesis? So those are the questions that I want you to think about while you read the story so you can answer the questions. Okay? All right. Ada Twist, Scientist. Ada Marie, said not a word till the day she turned 3. She bounced in her crib and looked all around, observing the world, but not making a sound. And look where she is. She learned how to climb and made her big break with a trail of chaos left in her wake. So that kind of means like she has a big mess over here. She made it very chaotic. There's things everywhere. She ran through the day chasing each sound and sight and didn't slow down until she conked out at night. So she was always on the move. Her parents were frazzled, but tried not to freak, as Ada grew bigger and still did not speak. Clearly, young Ada, with lots in her head, would have something to say when it ought to be said. So it looks like Ada, I'm thinking aloud. It looks like Ada is thinking about a lot of different things and exploring a lot of different things, but she's not talking yet. And her parents are a little confused and they're a little worried about her because she's not talking. That's just what happened when Ada turned 3. She tore through the house on a fact-finding spree and climbed up the clock just as high as she could. Her parents yelled, "Stop!" as all good parents would. Ada's chin quivered, but she did not cry. She took a deep breath and she simply asked, "Why?" So her parents are telling her to stop, and Ada is asking, "Why? Why do I have to stop? Why does it tick and why does it talk? Why don't we call it a granddaughter clock? Why are there pointy things stuck to a rose? Why are there hairs up inside of your nose?" So now she's talking and she's asking a lot of questions. She started with why and then what, how, and when. By bedtime, she came back to why once again. She drifted to sleep as her dazed parents smiled at the curious thoughts of their curious child, who wanted to know what the world was about. They kissed her and whispered, "You'll figure it out." So she has a lot of questions. Her parents kept up with their high-flying kid, whose questions and chaos both grew as she did. So she wasn't talking, and now she's asking a ton of questions. She wants to know everything. Even Miss Greer found her hands were quite full when young Ada's chaos wreaked havoc at school. But this much was clear about Miss Ada Twist. She had all the traits of a great scientist. And look what she's doing here. Teacher doesn't look too happy. And if you recognize this teacher from another story that we've read, especially with my 5th grade, you know that this teacher wasn't very nice. Ada was busy that first day of spring, testing the sounds that make mockingbirds sing, when a horrible stench whacked her right in the nose. Oh, here's the smell. A pungent aroma that curled up her toes. Now, when something smells pungent, that means it does not smell good. "Zowie," said Ada, which got her to thinking. "What is the source of that terrible stinking? How does a nose know there's something to smell? And does it still stink if there's no nose to tell?" She rattled off questions and tapped on her chin. She'd start at the start where she'd ought to begin. A mystery, a riddle, a puzzle, a quest. Oh, whoops, sorry. This was the moment that Ada loved best. So, I'm sorry. So, one of her hypotheses in this story, she wants to know. She has a lot of questions. That's why I was just getting confused. She has a lot of questions, but she really wants to know what is making the smell. And how does a nose know there's something to smell? So how does it know that it's time to smell something? So Ada did research to learn all she could of smelling and smells, both the stinky and good. One hypothesis Ada thought could be true. Oh, here's her guess. The terrible stink came from Dad's cabbage stew. So her first hypothesis is that she thinks that her educated guess from smelling all that nasty smell, she thinks that it came from her dad's stew. Now she's going to test and see if she's right. She tested and tested, but soon Ada knew. It was time to come up with hypothesis 2. So was she right about the stink coming from his stew? No. So her first hypothesis was not right. Then zowie, the stink struck again just like that. Hypothesis 2, oh, that's a part of our question also. It's caused by the cat. So what does she think is the second hypothesis of the stink? She thinks it's the cat that smells. The cat couldn't make such a stink on its own. It needed perfume and some fancy cologne. So young Ada tested. The test was a flop. She started again, but her parents yelled, "Stop!" So was she right? Nope, it was not the cat. So both of her hypotheses was wrong. Ada Marie, to the thinking chair now. By the time we count 3. Enough, said her mother. That's it, said her dad. Her parents were frustrated, frazzled, and mad. Why? Ada questioned. Her mother said no. What? Ada queried. Her father said, go. You've ruined our supper. You've made the cat stink. Enough with your questions. Now sit there and think. She looked at her parents. Her heart turned to goo. Poor Ada Twist didn't know what to do. She sat all alone by herself in the hall, and Ada once more could say nothing at all. And so Ada sat, and she sat, and she sat, and she thought about science and Stu and the cat, and how her experiments made such a big mess. Does it have to be so? Is that part of success? Are messes a problem? And while she was thinking, what was the source of that terrible stinking? Ada Marie did what scientists do. She asked a small question, and then she asked 2. Because remember, scientists always ask a lot of questions. That's how they discover things. And each of those led her to 3 questions more. And some of those questions resulted in 4. So she was really saying there that as a scientist, you ask a lot of questions, and sometimes they lead to more questions and more questions because, it just gets your mind thinking. As Ada got thinking, she really dug in. She scribbled her questions and tapped on her chin. She started at why, and then what, how, and when. At the end of the hall, she reached why once again. Her parents calmed down and they came back to talk. They looked at the hallway and just had to gawk. Wow, look what she did to the hallway. Look how she wrote on the whole wall. No patch of bare paint could be seen on the wall. The thinking chair was now the great thinking hall. They watched their young daughter and sighed as they did. What would they do with this curious kid who wanted to know what the world was about? They smiled and whispered, "We'll figure it out." So now they're understanding that she's got a lot of thinking on her mind, and they're kind of thinking now, maybe we should just let her be curious. And that's what they did. Because that's what you do when your kid has a passion and heart that is true. They remade their world. Now they're all in the act of helping young Ada sort fiction from fact. She asks lots of questions. How could she resist? It's all in the heart of a young scientist. So now look, they're all reading about things to help her now. They decided to join her team. And as for that smell, what can Ada Twist do but learn all she can with her friends in grade 2? Will they discover the stink that curls toes? Well, that is the question, and someday, who knows? So now you see how everybody is trying different things that smell to see if they can match the smell with what was stinking. Well, and that's it. So now let's go back to the questions real quick. So think about what her first hypothesis was about the stink. What did she think it was that smelled? What tools did she use? What did she use to test her hypothesis? You can go back in my story. It's also on Get Epic if you have your account. So you can go back in the story yourself if you don't want to watch my video. And was her hypothesis correct the first time? Now, we know the answer to that, but you have to explain why it was or wasn't correct, okay? Then you're going to discuss the second hypothesis, and they even labeled it in the book. So you should know what the second hypothesis was, and how did she test that one, and what happened. and think about what happened with her parents, okay? Um, and that's it. So if you need help with this, you could join me on Google Meet or send me a message. Let me know if you need help. Okay? See you soon.